special interest group webinar. So this first slide will appear at the end of the webinar as well, and you will have it as a handout within your control panel for the webinar software. So if you're interested in firstly getting involved more within the group, you've got my email there, so please contact me. And also we have a LinkedIn group, so the link's on this slide as well. So please join this. It keeps you more up to date with what we're doing as a group. Okay. If we now start the webinar for today, if I click on, I'll show you what the agenda is for today. So I'm just going to introduce the webinar and how the structure will be. Then Chris Seymour from Mars Foods will give one talk on the careers in the food industry, and then he will pause for some questions, and then he'll talk about careers interviews as well, and typical questions during interviews. And then the final talk will be for those who are interested in academia, and that will be by Ian Wilson, who is a professor at Cambridge University. So after each of these talks, we will review and have a few questions, and then right at the end we'll have approximately 15 minutes for more of a discussion around the questions and answering more questions. So you'll see that in your control panel for the GoToWebinar software, you should have a questions section. So please click on that, and any time throughout the webinar you can upload questions to that. I will be monitoring them, so I will then ask them as and when they're appropriate throughout the webinar. Okay, so just to reinforce, we will have questions throughout and then at the end. So please upload these to any questions that you've got through the webinar software. Okay, just to introduce a little bit about me. I have done a PhD with Walkers, or PepsiCo as the larger company is, and Walkers is a brand within that. I also worked for them doing a summer placement. I've got a wonderful image here of an iron foundry and castings of iron-containing equipment or parts. And so I worked for an iron foundry during my research project at the University of Birmingham. And they did in fact make parts for a Mercedes car, which is why I have the Mercedes image below this. I've worked for Rich Foods. I did a 6-month research project with Rich Foods, looking at understanding how to stabilize whipped toppings. So this could be whipped icings or whipped creams. They don't have to be sweet. I was working for them, understanding that, just before I did my PhD. What I've been doing for the last few years is managing within Unilever. So I've been managing a team of people working towards a new Dove roll-on product, hence the lovely photo of the roll-on there. So I've been working from 3-litre scale all the way up to 3 tons, which is clearly a lot of roll-on. And then in the future, I've just had a job change and I'm going to be working for Cadbury. Okay, so that gives a bit of an introduction about me, but what I'm going to do is ask you a question to try and understand the background of our audience. Okay, let me just launch this poll. Okay, you should now see a poll on your screen. Please vote. This is just to get an idea of where you are within your studies. So are you an undergraduate? Are you studying for a PhD? We're getting them coming in, and there's a high percentage, which is good to see, of undergraduate chemical engineers who are interested in FMCG. So that's good. And it's looking like I'll close the poll now because it looks like a good percentage of you have voted. So you should be able to see the results now. So if I share the results. So yeah, just over half of you are interested in FMCG, which is good. And we'll focus on what kind of roles you can have within FMCG and particularly food and drink, as that is our subject interest group. Okay, so I will now hand you over to Chris, who will talk to you about careers in food and drink industry.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Chris Seymour, and I'm going to be talking to you a bit more about some careers in the food and drink industry, with a particular focus on early career. So I just want to talk a bit about myself. I graduated with a chemical engineering degree. I got my master's from the University of Strathclyde. Graduated back in 2010, so I've been in the industry for about 5 years now. And I'm currently working as a senior process development scientist for Mars Food. And I'm located currently in Southern California. So I'm coming to you from 8 a.m. Pacific time. So, just to give you a bit more background about myself, I did my bachelor's degree and then went straight into my master's with Strathclyde University. During that time, I also did an Erasmus exchange program with the University of Alicante in Spain. That was for a semester, about 4 or 5 months. I was out in Spain, which was a great experience. It's also good for your CV or resume to have that kind of experience external to the university you've done your undergraduate with. Some other undergraduate experience I did in industry, I did 2 summer placements, my first being with Babcock Marine and Nuclear Engineering, that was located in Plymouth in the south of England, and I also did my second placement with ExxonMobil, which was near Southampton, and that was focused on downstream oil and gas refining, mostly around the petroleum fraction of the petroleum fraction of the crude oil. After working on nuclear engineering and oil and gas, I kind of decided that wasn't really the career choice I was looking to make, and I actually had more of a focus on FMCG in the foods and drinks industry, and I actually chose to do my master's thesis in partnership with Strathclyde University with Unilever, and I had a focus specifically on particle sizing for personal care products. The brand you're probably familiar with is the Vaseline brand, the Vaseline product. So following my thesis, I was offered a role in the Unilever Future Leadership Program, which is like a graduate trainee program. And a lot of companies have this. It's typically, and in my case, it was a 2-year program with 4 6-month placements. So you would rotate to different areas of the business, getting a feel for the different functions and different brands you could touch, and also the different general segments you would be in. So my first was in personal care, and that was in Port Sunlight outside of Liverpool, and it was mostly focused on laundry care, which was fabric conditioners and other products like that. I decided I actually wanted to focus specifically on food at that point, and during my program I was able to make that decision to move to a different role, being in the PG Tips tea factory, which is located in Manchester. After that, I got to enjoy working in the ice cream side of the business, which is a lot of fun. I moved to Colworth, which is near Bedford, just north of London. Um, and then I also got to do an international placement out in Italy, in Caivano, which is just east of Naples. After Unilever, I actually took a role with Mars Foods, and moved to the US. So I live now near Los Angeles, and I'm working specifically in process development. And I've now worked for Mars for 2 years. So that's enough about me. I want to put another poll out to get a bit more of an understanding of yourselves. More than half of you are undergraduate chemical engineers interested in FMCG, but what I'd like to know is if you have done a placement before, either summer or a gap year, perhaps, or for some of you have already completed a year and you have already got a job in the industry. So I'm just going to launch this poll now. So once it comes up, just go ahead and vote. See, we've already started. That's great. Okay. So most of you have voted now, so I'm just going to share the results. So it looks like a lot of you have done at least one summer placement or a gap year in industry. That's really great news. Also, a lot of you have done 2 or more placements, which is even better. I can't stress more how important it is for you to have some industry experience before you graduate from your university. For those of you that haven't had a placement yet, you maybe are earlier on in your degree, but I would start looking now. It's a great time to look. You're coming up towards the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of companies out there with internships and stuff for the summer. If you want to take a gap year in industry, it's great too. I guarantee you'll make a lot of friends and get to know another area of the country if you move somewhere around as well. So, yeah, that's great. So I'm just going to hide that and move on. Okay. So I just want to give you an intro to the fast-moving consumer goods and the food and drinks industry. So a lot of you are probably already aware of these companies. Myself, I've worked with both Unilever and Mars. And a lot of these you might already know. You maybe don't know Conagra Foods. You obviously know Coca-Cola. And that one on the right, that squiggly one, is General Mills. And we have Nestle, PepsiCo, and Mondelez. So within these companies, they're all structured very differently, but in general, they're broken down by different functions like these. So you have R&D, supply chain, sales, marketing, finance, HR, and typically IT. Now, they may be called something differently, but they are typically the same. They follow a general trend. Now, the 2 I'm going to focus on this afternoon, are going to be research and development and supply chain. These are the 2 technical functions that you would typically be looking at if you're studying chemical engineering. It's not to say that you can't go into these other ones, but I'm going to focus on these today. So research and development. I just want to give you some examples of some R&D functions, and these will vary across different companies. I'm in process development. It's typically it's a role that's very focused on the development of a product and the process in which it goes through to make it into a product. Packaging can be really take a lot of forms. It could be the labeling itself and the packaging science and doing migration studies and plastics and things like that. Product development can be anything from recipe development and inclusions and making claims on your products through a product development point. Regulatory affairs, that again is something that if you want to have a claim on your product, say like organic, something like that, then in whatever country you're launching your product. For example, in the US, we have USDA organic. We have to work with them to make sure that we can get that organic label on our product. Then there's a kind of front-end innovation. This can be defined as discover, where you're working in probably intellectual property and patent space, and working on things that are maybe known in the industry, but you're focusing on a breakthrough and innovation in that part of the industry. Some example job titles here, I just picked a few of them, and you can go on Glassdoor yourself. It's public information. These are posted by people for to see, what salaries are for typical roles. And all of these, apart from probably the regulatory affairs manager role, are probably entry-level roles or early career roles. And you can go in there and punch in whatever you're interested in, but these are just a few examples of what you could be applying for, and it will change across different companies. But I thought I'd give a couple in pounds in the UK and also US dollars for the US. So I'm just going to move on to supply chain. This is another area that a lot of chemical engineers go into. I've worked with a lot of people in supply chain that had a chemical engineering background. This can take many roles and many different forms: lean manufacturing, industrial engineering, project engineering. Project engineering being, maybe the design of a new line in a factory. Typically, these roles will be based in a factory, and you will be trying to improve on processes that are already installed or installing new ones, and basically increasing efficiency at the ground level. Quality assurance is another big one. That's obviously ensuring the quality of your product, make sure it's food safe, and then also it meets the criteria that your consumer is looking for. Again, the consumer is the most important person in your business. They tell you what they want and how they want it, and you need to make sure you have it at that standard for them. So again, I put in some example job titles here, and these are also, again, provided by Glassdoor. You can have a look again yourself for these roles if you're interested. So I just wanted to pause now. If any of you have any questions, you can add them to the webinar. If there's anything you have there, then I'm just going to default to Laura if she can give me some of the questions.
Yes, Chris, you've got quite a few come in, so that's good. So the first one is from Georgina Hunter. She says, what are the typical roles that you do on a day-to-day basis?
That's a very good question. So a lot of my role recently, and going into the industry, I was very interested in actually seeing the product come to life. So a lot of my role is around implementation of new products. And I have a bias towards being involved with that step of the process. So typically, I do run a lot of line trials in our factories. We have, in Mars, we have 2 factories, one in Mississippi and one in near Toronto in Canada in North America. So I do quite a bit of travel to these factories to run trials for new products. Of course, we do a lot of work in the pilot plant beforehand to do scale up. So we typically do a trial at a lower volume, or just to make sure everything's going to go as best as possible before we scale up to a larger scale and then run it in the factory. But that's one of the areas of my job that I really enjoy, and I do a lot.
Okay, we've got another one. We've got so many, but we've got another one which I think is quite a good one from Kirsty Walker. So how much of your degree have you applied to the jobs that you have done?
That's another good question. A lot of the, going through university, I found there was always classes I didn't enjoy, and some I did enjoy more. Typically in chemical engineering, you don't get a lot of food engineering classes, at least I didn't. But a lot of the other classes you do in university have a mathematical component or understanding chemical reaction component, and these are the things that you're going to be applying in your day-to-day life. And it's not just the technical things you learn in university that you'll be applying. It's actually how you bring them to life in a business context and present them to your higher ups in a format that they will understand. And you'll realize that more and more when you get into industry that that is a very crucial skill to have.
Okay, I think we'll stop there and go on to the next section. And I'll hold a lot of these questions back for the end.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a bit more on another topic now, which is interview skills. And I'm really going to be focusing again on an early career point of view. It looks, because half of you and have already probably looked into a career in the drink industry or FMCGs, and some of you that have done some summer placements in years in industry have probably had a lot of interviews already, and you're probably familiar with quite a bit of this already. But it's good always to review and what's the best way to get to be effective in an interview. So the purpose of an interview, it's really about, is the candidate going to fit well into the team and also ultimately the company that they're working for. So when you think about going for an interview, you've always got to think about the other person sitting across from you. The real purpose for the interview is that they have a role to fill. So they're looking for the right candidate, and you want to be the right candidate. You at least want to show them the skills that you have that are what they're looking for. So that's really, it's always a good bit of information to think about how they're thinking and what they're looking for. So the best way to do that is really come across competent and show them that you have the technical skills that are suited to the job. And there's a lot of different ways to show this. It's good to go through different examples, and we're going to kind of cover those off now. So these are some questions that you might ask yourself. So what are your strengths and weaknesses? You're going to get one question through an interview that is probably going to ask you about a weakness or something like that. That's always a difficult question. It's always good to get to be aware that everyone has certain weaknesses or work points to work on. But the most important thing that they're interested in are your strengths. And you're always going to do well in a role if you play to your strengths rather than try to fix your weaknesses. So it's always good to point them out as much as possible. And ultimately, they want to know more about you. You want to be you want to be personal in the interview and share with them a bit more about yourself, share your hobbies, show them you're proactive, and really just be yourself. You don't want to end up being in a team that you're not happy with, and that can happen too. I would definitely recommend to people to take a graduate role where you can move around a lot, because you're never going to be in one place too long. If you're struggling meeting with the people that you're working with, then you're going to be there for a certain period of time. Then you can move on and form new relationships. But it's always good to try and connect with everyone you're with. So you want to match up with a team. So you've got to be yourself and see if you get on with the people you're interviewing with. So one of the main parts of interviewing for one of the large FMCGs is that they all have their kind of competencies, and they're going to be assessing based on these competencies, because this is the framework in which they actually apply to how they form leadership in the company and how they assess their goals. So a couple of examples here from Mars and Unilever. Mars has the 5 principles, which are quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom. So, I mean, the first most important principle is really quality in Mars, and Mars is going to be looking for these principles in an associate that they're trying to hire. And it's the same here with Unilever. So Unilever have their standards of leadership. For both of these, you can actually go online and look at the principles or the competencies that they're looking for. For every company, all the large FMCG companies will have this on their website somewhere. So if you have an upcoming interview with any of these, then I would recommend you to go to their website and to actually look for their competencies there. So when you are offered an interview, like I said, you've got to understand the competencies the company is assessing against. For smaller companies that maybe don't have a website or something like that, that is very common to, that's a common situation as well. You can ask them for what they're looking for and ask for any sort of preparation you can have. I've had situations where they haven't really given me much information. Don't feel bad about asking for more information about your interview. Definitely push for them to give you more information, who's going to be there, what the interview process is going to be like, how many interviewers am I going to meet with, am I going to only be asked competency-based questions, or am I going to be asked technical questions? These are things you should know ahead of time, and don't feel shy to ask for these from the person calling about and offering you an interview. Again, you should know the company you're interviewing with. So if you're going for an interview with Procter & Gamble or Unilever or Mars, Google them and understand what they do and where they're from and where they're located and everything. You can Google them and you'll probably find most of the information you can, especially for some of the smaller companies that are, there's maybe not as much information readily available, or you've maybe not heard of them, and it's good to just look online and see what you can find out about them. So a lot of you have probably heard about competency-based questions. But competency-based questions are basically in the format of, tell me about a time where you did this or you did that. And these are the main areas in which you'll be asked of a competency-based question. So they're going to typically ask something about creativity, influencing or building a talent and a team, your judgment in general. Teamworking is always a big one, and planning an organization to deadlines and planning out even yourself or with a team. So a lot of the best way to answer these questions is through a technique that we refer to as STAR. And you maybe heard of this before. STAR is situation, task, action, result. So I'll just jump back to some of these examples. So if I'm to think of STAR, and I was asked a question, say on teamworking, or planning an organization. So I have a tight deadline. So the interview asked me, describe a time when you had a tight deadline and how did you handle this situation. So I probably speak to something about maybe a report I had for university and that had to be done in a week, and I had a personal commitment as well. I would tell them the situation, and then I would tell them the task that I had. So my task was to complete this write-up for, say, fermentation or something else, and then I would go into the action. So the action was I had to do, the 10-page document with scientific references, analysis. So I created a plan, and my action was that I broke up my time, and I was able to make a Gantt chart so that I could work out when I'd be able to sit down to do this. And the result being that I turned it on time without stress, and I was able to complete it fully. So you're really talking through the situation in a logical format that the interviewer can understand, and you really always want to ground yourself in that. It can be difficult sometimes. There are really difficult competency-based questions, but following this STAR method is always good to kind of keep you grounded as to where you're going with the conversation. So, in conclusion, practice is really good. Even if you meet with friends, to practice some competency-based questions. It can be difficult to get out of that, but with friends. But it's also good, if you get interviews with companies, it's good to go and do multiple interviews. So apply for lots of roles, and hopefully you'll get some interviews and get to practice your interview skills. Again, knowing your CV and or resume well is very important. They're going to ask you questions about it, and so you should know your CV resume back to front. So If you put in, something you did 5 years ago, remember it. So don't put anything in there that you can't recall straight away. And I'm going to pause there again for questions.
Yep, so I've got 3 quite appropriate questions. We'll see how long it takes to answer them. So one is from Kathana, who says that that they have a interview with Unilever, and it's a competency phone interview, and they were asking whether you had any top tips for the phone interview.
Well, yeah. So I've done a phone interview with Unilever myself, and I think to give you some good advice on that, it's always good to first of all make sure you have a good space and you have the time available to do the interview. You'll have a schedule when you get to do the phone interview, so make sure you have a clear space and imagine the person is really sitting across from you doing the interview. A phone interview is not going to go too much in depth. It may only be 30 minutes or an hour. So it's first getting, is this person competent and do they understand what we do and what they would do in the job? So get a good understanding of the company. The phone interview is typically the first screening process, maybe after doing some online tests or something. But it's really the first time that the employer gets to speak to you. And the phone interview will typically be with HR. So you're not talking to a technical representative at this point. You're probably talking to someone that is making sure you tick off the boxes so that you progress to the next stage. So come in confident, understand the company, understand their values, and be prepared to take those competency-based questions. And remember to be yourself.
Yeah, I would second that as also. I have had a Unilever phone interview. I think a top tip which you may not think about, but is to make sure that you're all alone. And what I always do on a phone interview is stand up, because I think you project your voice better. And if you sound nervous, or if you think you might sound nervous, when you're standing up, it sounds less like you're nervous.
That's good. Yeah.
It's a minor top tip, but I always go by it. Okay. I had a second question, and this probably links both of your presentations. So we'll end with this question, then go on to Ian. But I find it quite hard to get into internships because the competition is so high. I completely understand that and agree with that. So what do you suggest to make someone stand out? And that's from Norma.
I think there's a lot of ways you can stand out. I think generally when it comes to anything, if you're applying for university, you're applying for a job, don't discount your character and the things you do in your personal time. These are very important aspects of your life that interviewers and companies and people are always interested in. They want to know that you are a happy, interested person with passion towards what you do and what they're looking for, and you're the type of person that's out there looking to do stuff all the time. So, if you ran a marathon or done a triathlon or something, even fundraising and things like that are great things for your resume. But it's also great talking points. The more you do in your personal life that's applicable and relatable, the interviewer or anyone else can relate to that. So, and it's good to talk about that. They'll remember you more if you say, "Oh, I'm interested in. I used to do rowing when I was a kid. I loved it. I did this, races and stuff, and it was great." They'll remember you because you talked a bit more about yourself, and that's really important.
Okay, so if we just hand over now, while you're handing over the presenter rights to Ian, Chris, I'll just make a point. So I've had someone answer back in the question saying that actually don't be surprised if you do get a technical interview, because this person did get one. I know my experience is that generally they don't probe for technical, and Chris's experience is for that as well, but I suppose it is worth preparing for a technical interview. Okay, Ian, are you
Good
ready?
afternoon, everyone. Yes, good afternoon. I think I'm ready.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, can people see my screen?
They should be. If you put it in presenter mode, or sorry, to present it, we'll see just the slide rather than the slides on the left and the main slide. Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you. So I'm the guy on the left. That's my boss on the right. And as you can see, I'm a bit of a card-carrying academic. I don't usually dress like this, but I thought, why not put this photograph up once in a while? So yes, I've been working at the University of Cambridge for a long time, and I work a lot to do with food, but not always with food. And what I have been asked to do is talk about careers in the food industry from the academic side. So if you ask people about the world of academia, you will get many, many different words. And if you look at that diagram, you're not supposed to study it in great depth. You can see there are very different sides to it. For those of you who are involved in academia design at the minute in terms of education, you would associate yourself quite closely with the teaching side. Some of you are doing research, so you do see there's a research side. But there are other sides which the modern academic and academic institutions are also involved in, one of which is in training, and this is training people who already have qualifications, updating, etc., refreshing, or effectively empowering people to go into jobs. And the fourth thing which I've added here is that of expertise. In that, particularly in Europe and North America now, universities are seen as repositories of expertise in areas, and modern academics are often being consultants or serving as consultants to industry. So in the days when people were in ivory towers and then they came down to share their knowledge with the people from industry and then return to their ivory tower, I think those days are long gone, and that many academics are now working quite strongly and regularly with industry in terms of being experts or consultants. So not only is there a different type of activity going on, but where this happens is also changing. If you're doing a chemical engineering degree, you'll be associated with being in a university. But equally well, you could be working in a further education college, particularly on the teaching side. You could be working with an industry-sponsored institute, which is particularly common in France and Germany, or you could be in a research center, which actually probably doesn't do so much teaching, but could do quite a lot of research and expertise, as well as training. So for those of us who have come through a standard academic background, we often think of the university model as a way that modern academics work. And this slide was just to reinforce the fact that there are many ways in which people find themselves, and many places people find themselves working in and operating. So, how do you end up with a pathway in the food industry and academics? Well, the other thing that we may end up doing is doing different things. So you might be doing undergraduate teaching. Many of you are suffering from this at the moment. There are those of you who are on graduate courses, graduate teaching. Industry courses, particularly in training. Industry courses in terms of expertise and updating people. So these are subtly different courses. If you're doing research, you'll be supervising research students or examining research students. A lot of industry and academia is also involving postdocs and research fellows who obviously are not there looking for degrees, but they're carrying on doing projects. So it's a subtle difference in terms of the way that the academic works with the fellow or the student, as well as how the projects are set up. There's research staff who are permanent staff doing research within university bodies, and quite a few people prefer to be a researcher rather than, say, a lecturer and have that type of job. There are industry researchers who are doing things very similar to their colleagues in academics and universities, but of course don't have the teaching side to it. There's then the side which some of you will hear about a lot, of people having to apply for funding to do things. There's reporting all this, writing it up, writing reports, etc., which can be industry reports, they can be academic reports, they can be papers. And then the other one is then putting it into something and establishing it in the wider side of papers and books and things like that. So if you walk into any particular institute anywhere in the world, you'll find all sorts of things going on, Some people will be engaging in a couple of the blue things, some people will be engaging in quite a few of them. So, how do they get there? How do these people in academia get there? The classic one is you do a first degree. And obviously many of you are doing chemical engineering, hearing from this through the IChemE. But within the food industry, remember, people will be working and coming at it from very different angles. Food science and technology, there will be quite a few people there around you. But equally well, in the related sciences, physical sciences and biological sciences, and mathematics. So you can come into the food sector and food research from any of these. You then go on to a research degree, and at that point, everybody can swap. They can be a chemical engineer, goes on to work in a biological department, people doing biology degree working in a chemistry department, working in an engineering department. And there's a lot of transfer at the research degree stage. And in some cases, particularly the food sector, that's needed in order to pick up the expertise you need to work in the food industry. People might then say, well, I'll do a bit more research and do a postdoc, and then they become an academic. So that's the classic mode. That's the mode that has been around for quite a long time. There are a few others. But to come back to this classic mode, I'm going to go to a cartoon from my favorite website, some of you might be familiar with, called Piled Higher and Deeper, which is an American-based one and points a slightly ironic finger at the academic world every so often. And this is the perception in many ways there is an academic treadmill in order to get to the position of being a position of influence. And so this is a takeoff of a Ponzi scheme, the Proxy scheme, about how the eminent professors keep going. Anyway, I won't say any more about that, but there is something to bring out from this, also from Piled Higher and Deeper in the next slide, which is that academic salaries are not very high. So here we have a comparison of different salaries within the US from a few years ago, and you can see the grad students down there at about $18,000. The professors in the US census, lecturers, academics, getting up to about 100,000. And then, well, even the most highly ranked administrators are getting nowhere near the football coach. And that's really to do with market analytics and, of course, what universities can pay. So the bottom line is, if you want to be rich, not many people do it via academia. Anyway, traditional mode. Other career pathways are that people stay through the academic route in terms of developing expertise in research areas. And then they go into a position as a career researcher, which might be in a company, or it might be in an institute or a research institute, and that could be as a researcher or an engineer. And what I mean by an engineer here is rolling out the results of higher level research, actually implementing new things at the industrial scale or at the research side. Another one is that after your first degree or even a research degree, you end up in industry. And, well, within industry, you develop your expertise, and a lot of people do and they can create roles for themselves within companies, or in fact by moving between companies, so they become recognized as an industry researcher. And there are quite a few examples of people who have become very, very eminent as industry researchers and then gone into academia, particularly when they've decided that actually they've had enough of change of name of company, etc., etc. And, well, it looks slightly rosier on the other side. So people do come in this, particularly through the food sector, because of the expertise and the exposure you get to the challenges of the food industry through being involved in a company. And the final one then is where someone goes through the academic pathway and then goes sideways. Academics moving into industry and becoming industry researchers or becoming consultants. So what I've done there is shown you 4 different notional pathways. The key point was that there's no single pathway and people end up in positions for various reasons, often influenced by what really interests them and what they would like to do either now or either next. So we've heard from Chris. Chris moved company, which allowed him to move and develop those skills that he wanted to. The other thing about the state of academia is this one, is that ultimately the number of academic positions is less than the number of people who are postdocs and research fellows, which these days is usually the requirement for an academic position, and that's less than the number of people doing PhDs. So it's quite hard to plan your way all the way to being an academic, and so you might need to have a second plan if that was your original one. There is also, in modern academia, quite a lot of discussion about the emphasis to be given to teaching versus the emphasis on research, and this varies between institution and particularly between the type of institution. If you're in a further education college, the bulk of the work will often be on training and teaching. If you're in a university, the bulk of the work will often be in research and teaching, and this will vary from place to place. How you measure these things, well, that also varies from institution. So some institutions will measure your progress in terms of input, what you bring in, sometimes in terms of output, what you put out, and other ways in terms of reputation. And this is very important whenever you take up a position within an academic framework, is try and establish exactly how you will be measured and what the expectations are of you when you're doing that. How you measure teaching? Well, those of you who are students will know how universities measure teaching. Whether it's effective enough is up to you, and I'll just move on at that point. Okay, so you find that actually academics do very many different things. People in academia do different things, and you find different patterns within that. A classic one is what I would call the feudal system, where the academic is in charge of the research group, and under him or under her, they have a group of loyal postdocs and research fellows, and under them they have research students who feel like worker bees, as the picture here suggests, as slaving away to enable the Duke to further their kingdom. And this is the model that the piled higher and deeper cartoons perpetuate a lot. Particularly in Europe, you'll find other types of models. You will find the networker, which is where a group works with a group in another center, in another country. This is driven quite a lot by the European funding thing, and this is really useful in terms of gaining exposure to other ways of doing things, to training people and developing other skills. And the other one I would call is the trainer, where the person builds a group or works with people in terms of building up their expertise in particular areas. And I've put together these three models as ideas of modern academics, but I think you'll find that most people have a blend of all three in what they do. So I wouldn't suggest you try and focus on one individually. Piled higher and deeper has another view on this and how professors actually spend their time. You can see that on the one on the left is how they actually spend their time. The one in the middle is how the departments expect them to spend their time, and the percentages all add up to more than 100%. And the one on the right is how professors would like to spend their time. Anyway, this is just a take on academic freedom and how professors would like to really control what they do, which is in some ways the trade-off from not being paid so well. Anyway, moving on. What is life as a food academic like? And this is some of my thoughts about this. I would just like to start by saying I wouldn't describe myself as a food engineer. I'm an engineering lecturer, and quite a lot of what I do is to do with food. And this will come out in the slides that I'm going to come up with in a while. The first thing to note, and always remember, is that the food sector and the food industry is inherently interdisciplinary. It doesn't belong to any group because so many skills and so many techniques are needed to look after food. We will always have to look at engineering because we're manufacturing. We will always have to look at microbiology because we're looking at systems with live organisms. And we will always have to look at the inherent sciences because those control the interactions in that. So the first thing to do is to be prepared to work with other people and to learn what they do and the language they use. You may not be in a chemical engineering department if you want to work in the food sector, which means you have to be willing to learn another language. The words that food scientists use can be very different to the words that chemical engineers use. The terms can often be slightly different. But one of the things is that you bring expertise to this. And as a chemical engineer, you bring a training in mathematical analysis, in counting things, and also in the ability to think about scaling it up. And Chris and Laura have both talked about the importance of scale up in going from short-term and small-scale testing to take that through to the larger scale. The other thing to recognize is the food sector is inherently cyclical. Things come and go. Things come and go sometimes because of seasons, literally. The materials are only available for half the year, or because of fashions to do with the public and what is acceptable, or of course things that are beyond our control, like outbreaks of things and natural disasters. So often things are coming and going, which means that we're always involved with change and moving things on. It is then helpful, if you develop an expertise, is to understand how you can apply it in other sectors. Because what we're really talking about in the food sector is quite interesting microstructured products. So that dictates how things taste and how they break down in our body and they deliver the nutrients. And there are a whole series of different products around the world which use exactly the same things. And this is why you will find that the people who work with Unilever can transfer to the working in Mars, is because quite a lot of these skills are eminently transferable. And so it's worth developing an appreciation of why what you do with that food interest can be related to other materials. And this then protects you for a downturn in the cyclical process, in that while things are not going so well in the food industry, you can be translating your expertise to other sectors. It also helps you to understand the literature from other sectors, because often the answer for a problem or a challenge you have in the food sector exists with another type of material. And all you have to do, so to speak, is to understand how that material or that subject relates to what you're doing. So just because it isn't called food doesn't mean you can't use it. The other thing to understand, which is particular to the food industry, is the intellectual property position within the food industry. And this is different, inherently different to that in the pharmaceutical or fine chemicals industry, because of the situation to do with the fact you often cannot patent food, in that you have competition between people with almost the same products, and it's a very consumer-driven, market-driven position. So it's worth finding out a bit about that and understanding that from reading literature. Things can be quite short-term in terms of the need to actually answer something rather than develop very long-term practices. And then the way the business works. And if you're looking for a job with the company, it's always interesting to find out where and how they operate. So what I've done there is talk about some of the things that require languages. And this is one of my favorite quotes from another Irishman about the fact that England and America are two countries separated by a common language. So this is just really the point that when we read stuff to do with food and we try to work in the food sector, we have to be quite careful in understanding what people are talking about. And even in chemical engineering, this can be the case, because we find that there are actually very many differences between what is understood by food within the same institution in different departments. And what is a department in one country and in one institution is often slightly different in another one. The other thing to notice is if you think about working in different countries, is academic practice can be very different there. You only have to go from the UK to France to Germany to discover very different practice in there. So it's well worth finding out what it's like to be like if, for instance, you're thinking about doing research in another country. And I did my PhD in Canada, and it was interesting, well, very, very important for me to find out what the difference is between the two, between the UK and Canada. So what can we do? Well, one of the things to do is to realize that if you're younger, because I'm not that young, you're in a different world to the one I grew up in. You're in the world of the web, and it's a very different world. It's a completely international world. And you are effectively, if you're interested in the food industry, you're talking about a role that can be worldwide. You can work anywhere in the world because everyone needs to be fed. The other thing is that many major food companies are pan-national. They offer excellent opportunities to work in many different countries. Chris, as we've heard, is in California. And the food industry and the food academia is also pan-national and you'll find many things in different areas. Academia is obviously international, and there's a lot of transfer in terms of research, the opportunity to work in different countries in order to transfer your work from one market to another. So that's a good thing about it. So how do you actually work in this marketplace? Well, one of the things is to be known for publishing good work. This is what the web allows us to do. It allows us to judge and rank people. So in that case, you want to publish good work. And develop a web presence. Be known on the web. Develop your things through the various websites that allow people to promulgate their research. So this is taking more and more time with everybody because that's where all the action is. So important life skills. Some of these I think are international and universal life skills. The first one, the picture we've got up here of these people not looking particularly happy, is that most of your problems, just like in personal interactions, will be two-legged. Learn to work with people and how to handle groups. Running meetings and contributing to meetings, if you're effective in doing this, people will take notice and they will appreciate coming to meetings you're running. Elbow patches is how I describe the traditional academic whose elbow patches on their tweed jacket. It's time to move away from that in the day of the internet. So think about being a professional, particularly an engineer, work that through in what you do in terms of writing reports, be on time, even be in advance for meetings, and always show up for them when you said you would. Value students if you're teaching or if you're advising students, because you'll never know what they'll go on to do. In fact, they could be your boss. That's not unknown. And finally, my comment would be that quality is an attitude. People will come to you, and people will want you to come to them for quality. And the one thing to remember, as anything, time is your ultimate resource. You have to decide what you do. That's enough for me. Laura.
I was just about to say, shall we have a few questions? And it looks like it's perfect timing. So I've got one, quite a good one here, and I think it would be what I would ask you, is what made you decide to enter academia, and also why did you enter food and drink academia in particular, or FMCG, as I know you're not solely food and drink. And that was Sudhir who's asked that.
So I'll answer the second question first about why I ended up with FMCG. It's principally because I realized that this is something that's long term. People will always need food, they will always need drink, they will always need people working in this. And I associated with that about actually meeting a greater need in terms of the food industry. It'll always be with us. That's something I could identify. And also I could explain to people what I do. Why did I do it? Why did I enter academic? Well, by the time I finished my PhD, I needed a job, and I happened to be one in academia. That's how I ended up there. It was a bit more serendipity than planning.
Okay. So I think if we have one more question, it's from Matt Prescott. And before I read this out, if you're starting to leave because you've got places to go, can you please, when you leave the webinar, I'll ask you to give feedback to us. We'd love any feedback that you can give us. Any suggestions for future events to help as well would be great. Okay, so Matt Prescott has asked, what do you consider to be the greatest challenge facing the food and drink industry in the next 10 years? So I suppose that's relevant to you, Ian, but Chris may have an opinion on this as well. So if we start with you.
The greatest challenge facing the food and drink industry is one I think the IChemE have actually leapt onto, which is called the food and water and energy nexus. As the world population grows and the expectations of people grow in terms of what they'll be eating, in terms of how much energy they'll be using, they're all making demands on a finite resource. And so there are several issues there in how we actually feed the world, we give the world something to drink within a framework that my grandchildren, I don't have any yet, but I would like one day to have some grandchildren, so they could enjoy that as well. So it's this idea of how do we continue in a sustainable way.
Yes, yeah. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would actually echo Ian's comments. I would say, sustainability is the biggest focus in the industry. The sourcing of our raw materials is the most important thing we have in industry because they are fundamental to what we can actually make for the consumer. And sourcing sustainably is probably the most important part.
Mm. I do have another question actually, which probably links fairly well onto that. And it was one asked earlier on, and it's to you, Chris. It's if you were to choose, say, supply chain, can you transfer later on in your career to work in R&D or vice versa? And is there a better way to do it first or an easier way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For chemical engineers specifically, in your early career, I would say like first 5 years, it's not difficult for you to change between supply chain and R&D. It just depends on the situation in which you go into, which company you go into, and typically there might not be a role in the company you're in that applies to what you're looking for in, say, supply chain or R&D. But say after 5 years, if you're in R&D and you become a technical functional expert, then it will be more difficult for you to move to supply chain. However, if you move into, say, a people leadership role, you could actually move within any function. So if you become, say, a manager of people, you could really move across functions. And I've seen people in supply chain that have no technical background at all as people leaders in factories.
Okay. I'm just scanning the rest of the questions. I mean, there's a huge number. So to everyone that's online and hasn't had their question answered so far, I'm sorry about that. We are trying our best to answer them directly back to the person if we're not going to get to talk to them or talk about it in person. The one other question was around interviews and getting a job, and it was, do you have any advice on psychometric tests? No, I think that's quite a difficult one to advise on. I'm unsure if, Chris, you have been involved with psychometric tests before?
Yeah, so there are a lot of tests companies will do, numerical, and some of them are written. I've had tests that you don't even have enough time to finish the test, so it's almost like you're kind of scattered and they're trying to get some sort of feed out from what you're doing. The companies do use this as a screening method. Don't be too disheartened if you don't get through this process with a company. It's really the early stage. I would say apply for a lot of roles. If you're applying for the food and drink industry, typically you'll hopefully get at least to that stage. If not, then you apply for other things. But psychometric testing and other things, there are things online that you can prepare for. Specifically, I'd say be in a good state of mind and prepared, and have a notepad on the side and have a calculator and anything you can to be prepared for that. And really, it will come down to your timing as well, because typically these things are timed.
Okay, I promise this will be the last question then. I just keep on reading them and thinking they're really good questions, but I will finish with this question to Ian. So what makes food different than other sectors, such as pharma or fine chemicals? And that's from Moman.
Well, I was actually just typing out an answer to that. I've got three things here. One is that when you invent a new food product, many food products cannot be patented. They will be, shall we say, on a shelf with similar things within a few months beside it. So they're very competitive, and so the timescale for delivering and inventing new products is much shorter than in the pharma or fine chemical sector. Another one is scale. You have to supply a product, if it's successful, to possibly the whole population 365 days a year, or whenever people are expecting it. That's very different to pharma and fine chemicals. The second or the third one is that your raw materials are nearly always natural. They're grown on farms. They vary from year to year. You can be subject to all sorts of seasonal and weather-driven variation. So you have to have quite robust processes that can handle that. Whereas pharma and fine chemicals specify they want this molecule at this percentage of purity, and they can insist on that. That's not always possible in a food plant.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Ian and Chris, for some good presentations. We'll try and answer questions offline, so we'll be able to post the answers to the questions on our LinkedIn group site. So please take a look at that tomorrow to see if you've got an answer on there. Okay, thank you.